All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Tasneem. I'm at SWAP, the Society Work and Politics Institute, that's been putting this program together with a collective of people from Wits, but some of them at other universities now. So just an introduction to the project. This is part of a project called Remembering Movements. It was initiated last year at SWAP before the passing of SWAP director Prashani Naidu, and initiated together with her and Amit Viryava. So part of this process is also continuing to remember Prashani and her intellectual contribution to this project. A collective was brought together after that with the idea of remembering movements and considering 2025 as a 10-year marking 10 years since Fees Must Fall. The concept of remembering draws on Prashani's work, rememory as something of a methodological perspective that investigates political practices. And really it is a collective process that we want to undertake, and that's sort of why we've created a space within which to do forms of collective rememory. So drawing here on Prashani's work on remembering and the idea of remembering movements, and tonight remembering Fees Must Fall. And we're building over a few sessions, and we'll be hosting a colloquium on movements, remembering movements more broadly in October. But really this is a contribution to remembering Fees Must Fall after 10 years. The collective that's brought this together so far takes its starting point from movements that we were part of. So Fees Must Fall and the Anti-Privatization Forum are the ones that we're focusing on at the moment. So this is quite Wits focused at the moment, although we have reached out to others at UJ. But it really is taking it from the point at which we start from and the point at which we were involved in. So we're not trying to limit the scope of it, and we hope that the project can grow beyond us, if that's at all possible. So yeah, that brings us to tonight, where we're here to sort of kick off the process of remembering Fees Must Fall, remembering movements at Wits, and yeah, dealing with some of those complexities, collective histories, contestations, and all of that. Part of the project is also around archiving Fees Must Fall, something that hasn't yet happened, but which we are initiating together with the history workshop. And the collage making project, which some of you might have seen on social media, is part of that archiving process, and there's currently an open call out around the archiving process. So that's just another component of this, which focuses really on trying to archive Fees Must Fall and the movement. Okay, so tonight's hopefully the first of what will be a set of participatory workshops. Some sessions will be smaller, some will be more like this. And yeah, around the idea of remembering Fees Must Fall. We put out a call as the collective and as SWAP, which had a number of themes. But the first part of this, I wanted to just open up, and we can maybe come back to this later on, around how others want to shape the project, what kind of parts of Fees Must Fall people want to focus on, and so yeah, I mean, I want to open that up now, but we can come back to it after we've had a conversation about Oct 6 and tracing Fees Must Fall, and so that we can also see how this shapes up. But I will throw it open now if there are suggestions on how to shape the project. But if you could just keep that in mind, and it's something that we can come back around to. Otherwise, keep that in mind, and we're open to, and we want to sort of collectively shape this with others who are interested in remembering this moment. So yeah, I just invite that.
Yeah, even though I was around at the time and been involved in some ways with that moment, I wondered, how are you perceiving this? Are you wanting to put a group together that curate it, or are you saying come in and join the party, so to speak, and what do you want to do, and you can, we're happy if it's feeling aligned for you to sort of go ahead under the umbrella? You get where I'm coming from. Thanks.
So I was also supposed to ask Ahmed to jump in at some point. So Ahmed, maybe you can also take that question.
Okay. Thanks, Riyad. So one, I think it's very important that we're not attempting to kind of preempt what this remembering looks like. I hope everyone can hear me properly, and I apologize for the ambient noise. I'm sitting at like a coffee shop at the moment. So the idea is that Fees Must Fall as a kind of very multifaceted and diverse movement looks different from different perspectives of where people were standing at that moment. And we wanted to be able to collect as much of the different perspectives on the movement as part of collectively building a history of this movement 10 years on. So from our perspective, this is really a moment of reflection. What was Fees Must Fall for different people? But also an attempt to think about how the struggles that were initiated under the banner of Fees Must Fall and End Outsourcing can continue today, and maybe also provide a space for the remobilization of a very important cadre that developed in that moment. That might all be too ambitious at this point, but let's see how we go. I do think that like part of what was important for Pashani was the idea of collective history making. And I think everyone in SWAP shares that perspective. So the idea was to throw open a space in which people can reflect on this history, but also in a way that allows us to confront the differences that we encountered in how we understand that history. But with the eye developing new forms of collective subjectivity that can take forward the kind of struggle that Fees Must Fall and outsourcing represented. So that's it from my perspective. But of course, you know, the very idea is not to kind of preempt where this project can go. And hopefully others will have energies, ideas, and perspectives that can push it in multiple different directions. That's, yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. Is there anyone else at this point? Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nkululia Gosibia. So I was around during Fees Must Fall. I think one of the things that's poignant to me, if in the memory, is that one of the things I deal with all these years after is that there's still a perception that it was a bunch of kids who didn't know what they want. Yet we are in the university where I work here at the Graduate Center. We have cleaners that go to school today, you know. They come back and talk about how Fees Must Fall was very important. I mean, during Fees Must Fall, I learned that one of the cleaners was a mother to another cleaner, you know. And I think one of the things that's important is to have a moment where we talk about what were the results, because for me, I feel that there's still a time where it's like, no, those were a bunch of kids not knowing what they want. And yet we had people proposing different structures of funding free education and all sorts of things. And yes, there are different tropes, moments where a collective started being, we started fighting amongst each other and all of that, because some of us were fighting for the curriculum to continue. Some were saying zero-sum game, let it not continue. And it broke a whole lot of things, you know. But I think while we will talk about the struggle, we need to talk about how that struggle changed the lives of many people within this university. Thank you.
Looking. Okay. Yeah, let's keep thinking about that question, but I'll hand over to Noor for now.
I have a fairly easy task, I think, and that is really to try and coordinate a discussion centered around October the 6th. Now, it's really important that we sort of framing this set of conversations around the idea of remembering movements. Now, normally what would happen is that I would give a long lecture about what it means to remember, and I would give my version, my narrative and my analysis, and then you would respond to that. What we want to do very deliberately, and in the way that we have conceptualized these moments, is in fact to open for discussion, and not to presume that the views that I have predominate or should predominate or frame the conversation. Do I ever want to make just 2 or 3 comments? I want to start here. It's 10 years later, and when I walked into the room, I had a very brief conversation with a worker comrade called Richard, who was sitting behind me. And Richard was very active in the Worker Solidarity Committee, about which I will say 1 or 2 things in a minute. Was a key person in the insourcing process, and is still today struggling to get his job back. Okay? 10 years later. So when you correctly say that we need to talk about the struggles of workers, and Ahmed asks us to think about the way that we remember, not about principally focusing on what happened, but trying to understand the underlying processes, the politics that animated that moment, but also think about the present. Because if we hear simply, maybe to be nostalgic because we want to remember, there may be some people around the table who've moved on in their lives and for whom thinking about Fees Must Fall is a nostalgic exercise. Maybe they've moved on and up, because we know that there are people who were involved in Fees Must Fall that have moved in a different direction. That's not what we want to do. And I'm mentioning Richard, and I hope he doesn't mind, because the exercise that we're involved in has real meaning for politics today. If that's not what we're about, then I think we would be wasting our time, in my mind. The second issue is that from the moment of Fees Must Fall, and certainly in its latter stages, we saw a kind of flurry of publications around Fees Must Fall. Academic publications, analyses. Within months, there were books about Fees Must Fall. And those of you who were around will remember us asking ourselves, what should we do? And we were anxious about who was writing about Fees Must Fall, who was analyzing, and what were we doing? And of course, there was a process in which a number of the people around the table were involved in, reading and writing. So those who were active in the movement did do some writing. But by and large, the analyses and the narratives were constructed by people who were perhaps peripherally involved, and sometimes were only observers, but very importantly, people who were implacably opposed to the politics, to the essence of the movement. And so when we are remembering, it is also about reclaiming a project about how we want to remember. And Ahmed is correct to say we don't have a uniform way of remembering, a uniform understanding. But we've had very few moments in the last decade, certainly since the end of Fees Must Fall, where we've been able to convene as collectives to talk to one another about how we remember our own involvement from an individual basis as collectives. And there were a number of collectives in Fees Must Fall. Fees Must Fall was not just one homogeneous collective. There were groups, particularly groups of young women, who organized themselves to think about their place in the movement and how they should act. So remembering is also about speaking to ways in which Feast Must Fall has already been written about and spoken about. And you are right that there is a dominant view about Feast Must Fall as a group of young students who were disruptive, who didn't know what they wanted. Notwithstanding, I gave a lecture in this room yesterday and I reminded the audience that the clarion call of Feast Must Fall was to demand a decolonized public African university. That demand was not part of the political discourse ever before, not in that sharp way. And it was Feast Must Fall that did that. Now, I did promise I'm not going to speak long, but I can't help myself. The entry point for this conversation, for this part of the conversation, is October the 6th. And I'm referencing Richard because October the 6th was a really critical moment that brought together key forces here in Johannesburg that defined what I think was the essence of the Feast Must Fall movement. Because the Feast Must Fall movement was driven by students, but it was never only about students. From the beginning, and even before that, and this is why October the 6th is important, the students and workers in particular, with some academics, understood that this was about the crisis of universities, and it was about the future of universities. And although students were absolutely critical and the main force in that, there were other important forces, in particular the workers. And October the 6th, for those of you who may not remember, was a moment when we were able, and I talk here collectively, we were able as students and workers here at Wits University, as well as UJ, to come together to put the issue of the struggle against outsourcing very firmly on the agenda in a way that had not been the case, even though from the moment that outsourcing happened, workers continued to organize themselves together with sympathetic academics and sympathetic students. And I would say, as someone who was quite actively involved in that, that some of the best student leaders were the ones who stood with the workers, throughout the process of struggling against outsourcing and making the demand for insourcing. So when we remember October the 6th, I think that for me, there's an important framing, an important sense in which the collective forces that animated the Feast Must Fall movement should be inserted quite centrally in our remembering and in our analyses. So I have quite a few things to say about some of the things around the Workers' Solidarity Committee, the way that the insourcing, the hashtag insourcing movement exploded, across the country, during Feast Must Fall, and in my mind, how central that alliance between students and workers were in defining Feast Must Fall. The second last point I want to make is the way that the process of insourcing happened. And I think it's really critical that we reflect on that process, not only because there were some successes, but also in the way that the politics of Feast Must Fall insisted that that process should, for the first time at this university, involve workers very centrally in the process. I can't remember another occasion when workers would go to meetings in their work overalls every week for 18 months, okay, and sit on the 11th floor with management, with council, fighting for their rights. And often when we talk about Feast Must Fall, that process which kind of happened on the 11th floor is forgotten about. And I want to very deliberately bring that process back into it. And I wish that there were more workers. I don't want to speak on behalf of those workers. Richard is here and there are other comrades, because that must be brought into our understanding and our remembering of what Feast Must Fall was. And then I hope that part of the conversation can also reflect on how that process of insourcing, but also other process, other politics, led in my mind to an institutionalization of the discourse of Feast Must Fall, of some of the politics of Feast Must Fall, hollowing out the essence of what animated Feast Must Fall, to become part of a box-ticking exercise of the universities, bureaucracies, and managements, and what that means for how we remember Feast Must Fall and the legacy of Feast Must Fall. So I've said far too much. I'm going to, as I said, my job that I was given by Taz and the collective was to coordinate the conversation. So I'm going to throw open, and hopefully other people will ask questions, make comments, and then we can have a conversation. And then we'll come back to the question that Taz asked, and that is, what do we want to do with this process? And I'm hoping that the conversations that we have here will contribute to answering that question in the way that we have the conversations, in the issues that are raised, the debates that we have, and perhaps some of the questions. And please, you're not directing them to me. I'm merely kind of coordinating, directing it to all of us collectively, and we'll all collectively engage in the conversation. So, can I, you've got...
I mean, just a warning. It's good to see we've got some people from outside of Johannesburg on the Zoom and stuff. But from the experience of making the documentary, that was Everything Must Fall, on one university, it forced an introspection, the critique that, firstly, some of it's what I didn't find acceptable, but why could you just focus on one? And that's what we did, primarily this university and the struggles here and the movement here. The movement was much far bigger, far wider, but in many ways it was triggered by what happened here in terms of the mass action and what was happening previously with RMF. And I think while October 6 was a seminal moment, what was happening beforehand? So we had this big bubbling of student agitation and one form around what we call transformation, right? Sort of piecemeal, something needs to change in the system. There was no big critique of it, and around exclusions and people raising money for fees and so on. So there was a buzz happening in universities like this, historically privileged universities. But that wasn't only, there was an attack which had been going on for a number of years around the notion of what a public university should be. And if my memory serves me right, and I think we were sitting inside CB6, or they used to call CB6 the boardroom in Robert Sobukwe. And there was a discussion that we felt that there were a number, that we had a wide enough spread in a number of universities to be able to start making a real push around action in defense of the public university. So I just wanted to throw those two things in to the mix, because I think we're obligated in one way or the other to also represent, or are we, what was happening in the tens of thousands of other students around the country at the time.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard. I'm happy to be one of you on this meeting today. And thanks to Prof for talking a little bit about myself. Yeah. In fact, it seems like I'm only one worker here right now. So I'm representing all other workers who are not around. I don't want to say much about the struggle that I'm facing as a worker, but to be brief, I am being victimized for being active in the struggle of the fees must fall and outsourcing. I am facing this victimization since 2016. I was thrown out when everyone was getting insourced, so I was left out. I was out for 6 years. After 6 years, I came back, and then I was deployed in a wrong position because I started working at Wits in 2011 as a qualified electrician. But in 2023, when I came back, I was insourced as a cleaner. And then I am in grade 17. I have tried all the internal processes to negotiate with the university to correct that error, of which they are not willing to do so. I even took the matter to the CCMA. I'm going for the arbitration on next month, on the 21st of August. My issue right now, it's a victimization because of the effort that I put on this process of fees must fall in the staff. I'm worried because I'm not earning anything, but I am proud of myself. I am proud of what I've done. And then I'm proud to announce that the university initially was against the idea of insourcing the maintenance. So because of my effort that I put, 95 workers were insourced. And later on, other few workers were insourced again. Even though I am facing these challenges that I'm facing right now, but I am still happy for what I have done for the nation. I say so because I was fighting for the parents who are having the families. Right now they are working. But the most difficult part is that as a person who was on the forefront, I am still facing this discrimination, this victimization. And then with no one assisting, I'm still in the struggle. The struggle is not over for me. I'm still in the struggle. Right now, I am alone. That's a sad part. But I'm still strong. I'm still fighting. Okay. As I've said, that this is not about myself. On the side of the work of the students, especially in that time, I am proud of the students. I am proud of whatever they've done during that time to pave the way for the students who are at this university right now. So I will always cherish whatever the students have done. And then I can't forget the academics for the every support that you are still giving to us and also to the students. And then as I'm here, I was not aware that I will get this opportunity to speak. So I want to thank for giving me this opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Hi guys. So I wanted to say a couple of things about the October 6th mobilization, just from or just to kind of make sure that certain things are kept within the historical record. So of course there might be disagreements about this particular genealogy I'm going to give. But nonetheless, like kind of just going back to some of the things Riyad had said, I do want us to be clear that a lot of the demands that actually became the demands of Fees Must Fall, although slightly inflected in a different language, were already present in the struggles in the 1990s of the student movement. Of course, in the 2000s is when the actual process of outsourcing happens. And one of the outcomes of that as well is as workers and students come together with others in the city facing the Igoli 2002 program, the Anti-Privatization Forum is born. This, then I think, kind of a lot of the kind of social movement struggles that are happening for some students are actually, you know what I mean, no longer, the university is no longer the primary site. But what I think was important also when we remember October 6th is that the meeting that decided on some kind of mobilization around the issue of insourcing of workers came in the context of the United Front holding a meeting on, or the mobilization towards the United Front having a meeting on campus. So Mazibuko Jara came and, there was a meeting that was hosted. I think Melanie Sampson was also involved in that. And one of the things that happened in that meeting is the decision was taken that, from a Wits perspective, what was primary was to kind of return to this question of insourcing. And there had been a number of mobilizations that had happened in the preceding years. But what was really important, I think, also about October 6th was just the turnout that we received on the October 6th mobilization. That is, a lot of people turned out, and it was clear that there was a lot of political energy around this question. And a week later, of course, the kind of protest began around the issue of fees, which had been actually partly already lost within the SRC's discussions with management about the impending fee increase. And as a consequence of 3 days of shutdown that was using a new set of tactics, the university bent, and there was a suspension of the idea of the fee increase until a resolution had been agreed with students. But what was important as well is that on the Monday, when we have a mass meeting, and I think this one might be the one where me and Tez have a disagreement about when it actually took place. But on that, at that particular meeting, it was workers who reminded us that in our kind of agreement that we've now reached with university, that actually the workers had been left out. And they were an important part of not only the October 6th mobilization, but the 3 days of shutdown. So I think that's also quite important, is that the ways in which there was within Fees Must Fall also a contestation that required the workers' intervention in order to ensure that their program remained part of the program of the movement, given the role that they had played in building it. So I just wanted to keep that on the table. And I also, there's quite a bit that also happened in the kind of moments as we're leading up to that October 6th mobilization. One of the ideas was that we want to go beyond the talk shop, and that what was important was an orientation to political struggle. some form of mobilization. And I think that was important also in that it allowed us to find each other through actual practical political work. I remember being quite like lost about how we actually go about, engaging workers. And it was actually the workers themselves who kind of engaged us. And, Comrade Deliwe was quite important, I remember as well, in kind of helping us kind of establish some mass meetings in that mobilization that both students and workers participated in. But there's also kind of a much longer history of the mobilizations around the Workers' Solidarity Committee and so forth that also made that possible. So I think I'll leave it there. But I think it's important that we do keep in mind that that none of us anticipated what the end outsourcing and fees must fall movement would become. And for many of us, it was an inspiring moment precisely because of the ways in which it gave space to a new energy that was within the university. And it was partly also linked to Rhodes Must Fall, a kind of return of the kind of questions of decolonization. I think, there was a set of meetings that preceded as well with the Transform Wits Collective and so on. So I'd like to just kind of like flag all of these things as, points that need further teasing out and other modes of remembering.
I think I said about half of what I wanted to talk about, which was also just to kind of flag those longer bits of organizing that ended up being foundational to not to making FMF happen as such, but to enabling it to happen. So, and by the way, so it was exactly a United Front meeting that came up with the idea of the October 6 campaign. And I think one of the other things that the October 6 action put on the agenda here at Wits was also about direct action. So if I remember right, the idea of in the early morning, some students blocked the canteen, if I remember it correctly. So I think that had quite an important effect on the imagination of broader layers of people then faced with their own issue of fees in the case of students. But of course, it's also, I think we've also got to understand it as one of the more explosive episodes in quite a long series, I think, of waves and reiterations of what we can think of as recurrent betrayals, or at least discomforts that people were kind of forced into, going back to the so-called popcorn protests. The public sector strikes were my own particular area of expertise and so on. But also what we're seeing, obviously, is quite a recurrent history of kind of discomforts and betrayal is not quite the word I'm looking for, but I can't find the one I really want. But also the kind of recuperation that happens out of that. Now, I think that happened in different ways, it seems to me, with workers and with students. So it seems that with students, there was a very concerted political effort to try and kind of pull things back into the fold. It didn't happen easily, obviously, but obviously it also kind of speaks to the importance of having a political analysis that can kind of understand the limits of appealing to government and so on. But also it puts me in mind, so I think these recuperations for students happened quite often through political organization. I think for workers, it wasn't quite the same, right? That workers didn't got less recuperated than ended up being semi-disorganized by these quite mixed victories, I think. So I'm thinking now about the UJ workers, where you had what, so for me, what was quite this mix of agency and inspiration, but also of sheer chance of coincidence, that actually the October 6 action at UJ was marked by no workers taking place. It was only students, and doing it in a way that was kind of going over the heads of the workers a little bit, because workers were quite frightened, actually. What happened, though, was then, so the student fees must fall at UJ was like a 3-day wonder. But in the middle, as that was started, so that got recuperated very quickly within, you know, the SRC there was basically already in management's pocket, so they didn't have to work hard at all to pull that all back into place. But it coincided by chance with the fact that it was the last day of the contract that workers were on there. And the fact that by that last day, the main thing was that people were left up in the air. They were asking for answers about what would happen to their pension and all sorts of very mundane, nitty-gritty things, not with a wide imagination and so on. And not getting those answers, but in the context of having just seen all these huge student things, had this transformative effect on confidence, right? So the kind of moments, and I know we're not here to talk about moments, but I want to talk about it because of the kind of metaphor it gives. That I remember the point when people decided, after thinking that we can't march, we can't strike or whatever, we're too much at risk, that there was this moment. So it was the last day of the month. It must have been the 31st of October. And people decided to march backwards up the ramp from the kind of parking lot dungeon where all the cleaning staff got sent off to their things. And then that turned into a 3-week unprotected strike, which so the way that ends up, so people did get then insourced, but not back to the kinds of standards that people expected. So I think in that case there was also, so your experiences reminded me of it. You know, you end up with this feeling on the one hand, we won a victory, but then the victory turning out to be emptier than expected. So not carrying a lot of the promise that could have been carried. So I'm sorry, those are slightly discombobulated sort of thoughts, but about the kind of mix of agency and chance, I think are two of the things that are quite important for thinking about how that happened, right? That people were organizing, and there was at both campuses this long history of worker student trying to organize the worker student staff solidarity. But then coming also in the frame, the political frame of all these other, you know, and they're not moments, they're more like waves of people starting to question the loyalties of the ruling party to its supporters and erstwhile supporters, right? Like the protests and the NUMSA moment. But I mean, I think the biggest thing though is the thing we've got to learn from it is how to short circuit these recuperations that happen every time, yeah, if we want to really get where we get any further with these things.
Hello, everyone. I don't know, I don't think you can see me, but probably just hear me. It's lovely to see images of you in that room. So Leanne and I are on this side in Cape Town, frantically going through our files around October 6th to try and see what we can retrieve. And one of the things I wanted to add, and I think this is going to, you know, Noah will laugh, but the difficulty of everybody, of doing a compiled collective history is that everyone remembers something slightly different. So I don't remember, Claire, that October 6th comes from the United Front meetings. What I remember is that there was a concerted effort to bring students, workers, and academic faculty together um, to take up long-standing struggles that Transform Wits and insourcing had been waging for years, but also to respond to the provocations that Rhodes Must Fall had made at UCT, and that there was a sense that it was an important moment to respond from Wits, drawing on those longer struggles. And I remember sitting in the Anthropology Museum week after week with comrades from UJ and Wits, and we assembled a list, I think, and others might correct me, but I think of 4 or 5 key demands that we wanted to collectively work on. And I remember Prashani so clearly being the one to insist on working on the decolonization of the curriculum as a key point, that she put herself forward to do some of that work. So the one was around curriculum work and thinking seriously about how we wanted to take on radical transformations in curricula. The second was insourcing. There was one around fees and free education. And if I'm remembering correctly, there was also a theme around the decriminalization of student protest. And then the fifth was a kind of media campaign that we felt like that we should drive around those 4 core themes. And out of those discussions came this idea that Noah referenced earlier of a public decolonized African university, which then went on all of the pamphlets and the statements and the, what did we call it? A charter. We also drew up a charter. And in thinking about those 4 themes, what was really clear in the discussions was that the first one we wanted to work on was insourcing, in part because of the input from workers that Ahmed was referring to, but also because that was in fact this 15-year long-standing struggle that had been worked on consistently by a small group of radical workers, students, and faculty for a very long time. So the interpretation was that insourcing should be the first one of these 4 themes that we wanted to work on together. And I remember trying to think about a name for that first action. And Ahmed, I think you drew on something that came out of Occupy Wall Street, some kind of date, so that it didn't have the reference was to a date rather than to a slogan or an action. And I remember you suggesting Oct 6 as the name for that day of action. So I'll end there, but just wanted to add.
Maybe I can add, this is Leanne. Hi, it's very nice to see images of all of you. It is also very good to see Comrade Richard. We were in the insourcing student negotiations, so it's very good to see you again, Com. And maybe just to add that I think what October 6 provided was the data as Kelly's described, but then slow working towards a date of action, precisely because the feeling was that we shouldn't just talk about things, as Ahmed has already referenced, but the slow working towards that date. And then, as Noor had mentioned, speaking back to the Black-led student movements that had started largely in historically white universities around the question of decolonization. And I think the importance of October 6 is also that out of that slow meeting between academics, students, and workers, often chaired and led by workers and students, I'm remembering, was that in identifying one time and one day, we could easily go back to networks of Black-led student movements out of University of Pretoria, Stellenbosch, all the historically white ones, that had the same issue with the problem with outsourcing, and that people were in those institutions demobilized through the university's strong action to shut down some of the resistance that had happened earlier in the year. And so it's really important. I was opening some of the letters of support that came from unions, non-profit organizations that were also working on worker issues, and then importantly, other university student formations that were very excited and happy to organize around the first national protest against outsourcing. So that unification of a date and time, drawing in and drawing on the slower work, the previous work around the questions of decolonization and the ongoing struggles in that regard was, I think, what helped coalesce people beyond their own institutions into one moment together. And then I also just opened up a memorandum here from the then director's office, PIMD at Wits, Polisi Dube, who had on the 5th of October wrote a letter about the planned protest action at Wits saying that this cannot happen. This was on the 5th of October. And I remember quite distinctly that at that moment, the SRC representatives, and I think it was Shaira at that point, who was part of October 6 and the meetings prior to, who stood up quite firmly to push back against the university's attempt to stop this particular protest. Thanks. Sorry for being long.
Is there anyone else on the Lindy? Anyone else there? Okay. I should just say there's a geographic political division emerging because as Kelly was speaking about the name October the 6th and remembering it in a particular way, a number of people around the table said no, because in fact October the 6th is a reference to April the 6th movement in Egypt, a student movement that comes out of the Arab Spring. And that's where we adopted the name October the 6th. Yeah.
I think I just wanted to go back to Brother Richard and what he was talking about. I think one of the things in the memory of this thing is how painful struggling is. It was very painful, and I think we still have the residue of trauma today. I think that's one of the things that has to be talked about, because in the voice of Bob Richard, I can hear the trauma. You know, being victimized is something that happened to a lot of students, even the government victimizing individuals. Some people got their PhDs, they can't practice today because universities still treat them as, you know. So I don't know how we can speak about this assimilation of the rest of us, you know, where we get this feeling that I know everything went all right and we moved on, you know, and then it's only a few that feel like there are those who still feel they are still in that struggle and they are left alone. I remember debriefing sessions. I'm in the Wits Media Studies department where, you know, staff, students, everybody said we cried trying to make sense of what was going on because we ourselves were starting to disagree about the strategies. The longer the whole thing went, we were starting to have disagreements about how to achieve this free education. And this is where the romanticization of any revolution or struggle needs to be talked about, you know. I mean, the costs. I remember having blisters going to UJ. We were marching with some of the workers. We had blisters, you know, only to be caught up on that bridge with stones being thrown left to right, fighting with securities. So right now, one of the things I'm thinking about deeply is, have we managed to change the consciousness of university spaces? Or have we just been assimilated through the hegemonic nature of the university? And of course, the fear of victimization, you know, because if then we remain with institutions, whether it's government outside fighting the likes of, there's many names, right? But there are people who can't live their lives properly today. So how do we look at the universities in terms of changing? Yes, we're still talking about decolonization. Some departments changed. They had progressive people. Some departments didn't change. I mean, you had academics who were totally against what was happening because they wanted to maintain status quo. You know, it was a very costly process. And I think the trauma and the residue of that trauma 10 years later, I think it needs to be attended to because we seem to, you know, some of us have this feeling that things were achieved. Like when I see Mam Plandina putting her tools down and saying, no, I'm going to class for the next 3 days, I won't be cleaning. You know, I come back, I go back home and I say, yeah, we achieved something with that Fees Must Fall. But I come back and I listen to Bob Richard and again, I'm taken back to the traumas. You know, what did we achieve really then? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to come back on that very quickly because I think while the movement and the protest and the scale of the protest, I think that's what released a lot of trauma, actually. The trauma of being in a place like this where the demographic is majority black and you're surrounded by the walls are dripping with whiteness. Now, that's the trauma for black students. The trauma is having to sleep in the library and, you know, can you get through the 3-4 years without getting excluded? So for me, and I don't want to sound like an old timer here, but I want to use some terminology, but I do think it represented an emancipatory moment for a number of people who are centrally involved in those assemblies, and that's students and workers. And that, I think, is true for a number of other universities around the country, the scale of the mobilization. For the first time, it transcended the parochial to move to a national. And what emerged was a new political imagination. And if anything, that's why hopefully we're here 10 years on and wanting to reflect, because there was a break that our future could be different. And it had never come from anywhere before with such large numbers and with such force. And it was, for me, you know, the political critique which was emerging in the RMF comes together with the propulsion from the students who are facing, working class students who are facing exclusion on a daily, weekly basis. And yeah, the violence certainly was deeply traumatic, but it was a partial victory. Come on. Hundreds of thousands of people got bursaries that hadn't got bursaries before. You know, we can talk about the superficiality of the decolonization program, which was taken, you know, the imagination, it sparked an imagination internationally amongst universities. But, you know, the curriculum, you know, years and years on the curriculum, yes, important, but it doesn't decolonize a university. What decolonizes a university is the way it's run, who it's run by. You know, the senior executives continue to run the universities in our country and around the world. We want a university which is democratically controlled. And that was the propulsion, and that's the imagination that emerged. And it needs to be celebrated, trauma and all.
Hi, everyone. I am a bit of an interloper because I was not at Wits during this time. I was at CPUT, Cape Peninsula University of Technology, between there and Fort Hare and Rhodes. And my memory is not very good, so if I say things that are not accurate, I apologize. But I wanted to pick up on the issue of trauma and of imagination from a different perspective, outside of historically white universities. So I remember being at CPUT, which is a predominantly black working class university in Cape Town. And the guards that were called in, the security guards were called in by a black dean, a black woman dean, who used apartheid-era language. She said that the students were congregating illegally. They were talking illegally with each other. And she called in these security guards that were actually mercenaries. They had been mercenaries in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they came with semi-automatic rifles with live ammunition and pointed them at the students who were just sitting under the trees. And I remember the academics having to go and stand in front of the mercenaries who had been really part of imperial wars and try to protect the students with their bodies. A number of students at CPUT were murdered, and a large number of them were arrested and sent to Polsmoor. I remember asking comrades at UCT and Wits, please, for the love of God, I know you have some extra money, please, our babies are going to go to Polsmoor if we can't get them out today, if we don't have enough bail money. Can you share a little bit of money? And with the coldest, hardest language, they told us to fuck off, essentially. They did not use that language, but that was in the spirit of what they were saying. The second one, I was at Rhodes, and we had organized a Eastern Cape-wide conversation between students at Fort Hare, Wusu, Walter Sisulu University, Rhodes, and Nelson Mandela University. And this was happening at Rhodes. And so there were all of these postgrad students from across the Eastern Cape coming there to talk about questions of decolonization, fees must fall, and so on. And the way that students at Rhodes comported themselves and spoke to the students, or spoke down at the students at Fort Hare and Wusu, was so bad that it was a 3-day thing, you guys. After 1.5 days, the Wusu students ran away back to their university. They were so bullied and demeaned by students at Rhodes, right? And that same group of students, I mean, it was my university as well, it was us collectively, but I remember at some point there being a moment where there had been a really important mobilization at the university, and then student leaders left the university, went into Makanda, and joined the taxi drivers who went on a pogrom through Gini, through Makanda, through Grahamstown, looking for Muslim people in town, because there was the story going around how some child had been raped or killed, and they were saying, oh no, it was a Muslim. So they went, all the Pakistanis, the Bangladeshis, the Somalis, the Sudanese, they went round threatening to rape and kill them and their families. 200 and something families were forced out of Makanda and had to go into hiding. They had to be evacuated from the town. And the people who were leading this, some of them were the student leaders of this movement. Also, some of the people fighting back were also the student leaders, right? Don't get me wrong. But I think, like, if we are asking ourselves, what is the imagination of a decolonized African public university? And what does it mean for us to be human together? And what does it mean for us? Because all of that, we carry that trauma with us, right? And those stories of violence, they're so extreme. Go to Wusu today, you guys. Have you seen what's happening at Wusu? And not one finger is raised. It doesn't matter how many black students at Wusu are killed. Nobody cares, right? Nobody. So, like, I guess my feeling is I loved this movement so much, and I had so much respect for everybody in that movement. But also, what is the imagination of that movement? It is not just one thing, it is many things. And And how do we hold on to that emancipatory story, which is definitely there, without erasing all of the harm and the hurt and the trauma that continues to reverberate over time that came out of that? Not because necessarily one person or another person was a bad human being, but because sometimes we find ourselves caught up in historical imaginations that we don't know how to free ourselves from. Yeah.
And I will open up for you in a second, Mo. I just want to read a comment here from Joel Quirk that came up a bit earlier, which says, and I guess this will be for future conversations, I'd like to invite people to speak a bit more about the effects of contingency and chance. I've always thought that Wits management made a massive tactical error by announcing a double-digit fee increase while students were still attending classes and the SRC was in handover. So there were lots of potential leaders. If public news of the fee increase had been held until December, would we have got FMF in the form it ultimately took? So something to think about. There is also someone asking for particulars of the students at UCT and Wits, and for the names of those who were killed at CPUT. I'm going to maybe let the chair respond to that. And now I'm going to unmute you, Mo.
Great. Hi, comrades. It's Mohammed Jamil Abdullah from UCT. I hear Alex is also going to come after me, so it seems there's a little bit of an RMF thing coming from Cape Town. It's good to see some of your faces again. I was obviously at RMF during 2015, but after suspension, I was actually at Wits for about a year as a journalist for the Daily Vox, so I have a little bit of experience of both. I just wanted to respond to two things. I mean, Comrade Rihad provoked me a bit with the kind of, and also the comrade who spoke before about the kind of what did it achieve. And I think it's something that, you know, somebody who's been part of the space for however long it's been since then, the thoughts about, you know, what did we achieve? What was it all for? And the linking to that, what the comrade is saying about trauma, like what did we go through all of this for? Our lives would change in certain ways. And I mean, it might be a personal thing on my part, but what I have always thought about generally is, I mean, one of the greatest, I think, or one of the achievements is that the group of students who came out of that space, I think in some way or another were irrevocably transformed, sometimes in ways that are like entirely traumatized, but in other ways, it really created another layer of individuals who entered the kind of conscious political space in a different type of way. I mean, some people will say, like, you know, who really went into parliament and that kind of stuff. But I think there's another element to that about there was a layer of people who came through this space who can never kind of really fully integrate into the status quo ever again. And I think that is remarkable. And I think that's very important to remember. And then the other thing is, just as like a journalist or reader person, I think the language that was, I don't say created, but was popularized about colonization and all these things we still talk about today, you can see it being used right now in like social media and common language on TikTok regarding Palestine, regarding what people are going through in all kinds of contexts. The language of being a colonizer is something that can never be taken out of the public discourse anymore. And I think part of that started during that period. And so I think the way in which we talk about things that are happening today are linked in small ways. I don't claim like some sort of direct like causation, because these things are a lot older than this, obviously. But I think there is definitely an element of a wave that hasn't fully been able to crash, even though there's been retreats and kind of pushback from universities and like all these things that have been taking place. And so I wonder whether we shouldn't be measuring the arc of success or failure of these moments in FMF and RMF are the ones that came forward in terms of like small policy changes. But I think the kind of how has the political terrain, how has the political space shifted since then, and what have been some of the ways it's shifted? And I think there has been a magnificent shift, even though some of the gains have been lost or some have been kind of retreated. Then the last one is a bit of an aside. I was at UCT, and I would love to know who told the CPU people to fuck off, because I mean, from my own experience of being in RMF, I mean, we got donations and stuff from people who are sympathetic against the statue thing, and I just remember Alex can like back me up here, but like a lot of what we were doing was bailing fellow students from UWC, CPUT, and amongst ourselves out of prison a lot of the time. That was like what a lot of our kind of organizing work was about, mobilizing resources towards getting people out of jail. That was like a big part of things. So I'm just shocked to hear about that there was this experience. It's the first time I'm also hearing about it. So I just like it's a bit jarring to me that happened. There was definitely class dynamics in terms of who got coverage and who was supported and who cared about Wits more than all the other spaces, or UWC or UCT more than UWC and UJ and stuff. But maybe I'm just jaded and looking at it with rose-tinted glasses. But I just remember there being a real sense of we need to link and make connections with the other universities and build that thing very strongly. Last point, sorry, I'm taking long. For Wits comrades, I think in a lot of ways the October 6th and the end outsourcing call really inspired us at UCT and other universities. Even though it wasn't all the call, the fact that we could kind of relay and bounce off almost like campaign or like kind of like visions of what this university space needs to be. I think there was the bouncing of a sharing of ideas, and kind of that thing was happening between universities, which I think is really important. How is it that October 6th kind of impacted how other universities saw what the campaign should be, and how we can better realize this decolonized university? And I think that kind of bouncing off of being inspired by what others were doing in other spaces was really important thing to remember in the bigger remembering we have. Thank you so much, comrades.
Hi, comrades. It's very good to see some of you, and I had kind of, and also to hear from you, Mohammed. I thought I was not going to put my hand up, but I also think I was quite jarred also by the CPUT and UWC story, not to be defensive, but I think, as Mohammed has said, I think the point around universities that were historically Black and continue to be so, like UWC and CPUT, were marginalized from media coverage, but also experienced the type of violence that other universities like UCT didn't. So the live bullets, the purple rain, all of those things, like in a confined space where, it wasn't visible to the public, was really horrific. And so I think what was critical to us as RMF was to build that solidarity and to have collective meetings. So we attended a lot of meetings at UWC as well as CPUT, and that was like really critical. But what October 6th also did was we were able to meet universities, and this was happening throughout that year across the country, that were organizing, particularly Black student movements, whether it was NWU, whether it was NMU, Rhodes, etc. And that was really critical to build solidarity, so that when Wits shut down, we were able to act in solidarity through a national shutdown. And I think that wouldn't have happened because I think we also have to be honest that wasn't as spontaneous as people think it was. We had been organizing and meeting with comrades around how do we act in solidarity given Wits' shutdown. So we had gone to the DHET summit in Durban that we disrupted and organized with comrades from different universities to meet with Blade and fight with him while Habib was there and you guys were shutting down. So it was really important moment for us. And I'm also interested to know, because what we are hearing at UCT is that some of the gains, particularly for workers, are at this present moment being reversed. So Nehau has indicated that a lot of the, particularly security and catering, they're wanting to outsource again. So, it would be interesting to know what the situation is at Wits, as well as at other universities. But I also think, the October 6th moment was really important for us to be in solidarity and to share tactics and to share organizing. There were comrades from Wits who had actually joined us in the October 6th moment. And there was a kind of mini shutdown, but it was a point where we had had a lull in the movement because of interdicts, because of being evicted from our occupation, etc. And so that was a really important galvanizing moment for us, and to strengthen and build worker solidarity with students at the university. And I must say, one of the things that was very telling for me is that, unlike at Wits, at UCT, for example, there were not even many academics who wanted to be in solidarity with workers or who saw themselves as workers. So I think that's another thing that I want to raise. Thanks.
Okay, I'll be very quick then. So I just wanted to say, about romanticizing the movement. So, I mean, of course we shouldn't, because literally some of us died. And I still don't want to see what's happening to people's future kids from the amount of pepper spray we inhaled at UJA and so on. So it's not to romanticize, but to be absolutely realistic that, in fact, the scale of the repression and the trauma inflicted upon us was directly related to the level of the challenge that was actually being posed to the ruling party in that moment. Okay, and I think that was evidenced both in the extreme repression, but also in how they fell over themselves running to try and make friends again with elements of the student movement. Okay, and I think that was a very crucial part of the explanation of how we got clapped, was the exploitation of those exact political divisions. And I suppose also maybe that we needed to think about the implications of the different politics. I mean, I don't know if we realistically could have done it differently, but I mean, I think we do need to keep that in mind, that it was a massive challenge, and it was because of that we really did get clapped. I mean, the shock for me sometimes is that more of us didn't die. I'm amazed how we got through all of that without more people dying. And I think the other thing that we've got to learn from it, though, is if we don't go hard and win, and that is a political and strategic question, because it's easy when we're all swept together by the same shared dreams and demands, to be a big and powerful movement. But then when the going gets tough is then when the strategic questions become crucial. That's where, the movement kind of lost its way in that. And I think we can't beat ourselves up for that. It's a young movement and all of that. But also the other thing is, if we don't go hard and when we do get clapped, and also we don't keep the victories, the small victories that we did win, we don't keep them for very long. So they did have to give something to buy off that movement. Okay, it was big enough that it couldn't be bought just by some kind of, purely by just some political machinations. Okay, they had to give something. But when you look at what is now being reversed, okay, so some of the negatives, not the negatives that we won, but the negatives that came from us not winning more decisively. We have a complete normalization of violence as a method of governance at universities, and a complete normalization that there is now such a thing as permitted protest. That a protest cannot just happen because we're students and are doing something, or workers or whatever. One of the positive things is that the driveway into UJ used to be decorated with large rocks, and those rocks are now all gone forever and replaced by lovely plants, because people kept picking them up and throwing them at the police and the security guards. But on the other hand, we're sitting there with 5% increases. Is that what we got this year? 5%? I think that's not even inflation. NSFAS, behind the scenes, they pulled out the stops to say 0% increase, blah, blah, blah. But immediately they started moving money away from postgrads and into undergrad to try and fill those gaps. And what was it last year? 7 people in my class. I couldn't understand why they never submitted anything. It turned out they'd been deregistered halfway through the year because their NSFAS money didn't come through, right? So NSFAS is getting narrower and narrower and less of a solution again. So I think those are the things. So the great, victory that we've got to claim is that we found each other to be able 10 years later to talk about what the possibilities that were opened up by that movement, but also how do we start, not a rearguard action, but start thinking about when are we going to be able to go on the offensive again, to start winning back that ground,
My name is Zama. I was a third year, second year mixed student during the Fees Must Fall 2015-2016 uprising. And I've been tasked to speak a little bit about what we thought at the time were the origins of the movement. And this can be a discussion that is of another time. But I just want to, before I start, just to answer to the previous session and the question that Tasneem asked us at the beginning in terms of how do we shape the space and how can we speak about remembering this movement. And I think my takeaway from the previous session is that this is a huge movement. This is a huge moment. It was big and it was a mass mobilization. And to speak of it in one session or 2 sessions is never going to be enough. Just thinking about this session about the origins of the movement in itself can take discussions over days. Just to think about the protest itself, the mass mobilization itself, what happened in the movement, how did we mobilize, what were the politics in play in mobilization, that's another 2-day, 3-day discussion. My brother comrade here spoke about, let's think about the victories, let's think about what happened, what we won. Some people might talk about defeats. Some people might talk about the small victories, which were there in terms of, you don't need to pay initial payments now. You don't need to pay for your SAP if you failed your exam. You don't need to do these things that you used to struggle for on campus. That's another discussion for many other days. So I want to appeal to SWAP that maybe we should think about arranging these discussions of remembering in kind of chunks that we can take on as we move, because people will bring all of these discussions. And I'm interested in discussions that came up now in terms of what happened within the struggles between the previously white universities and the push colleges, as they said in apartheid times. I mean, that for me was very interesting to come up. The worker struggles itself needs another day of discussion, and I think, I don't know, I want to speak to Tasneem and appeal that maybe we should have multiple sessions that think about these things, because there's so much to talk about from the UCT's perspective, from what happened in UJ, what happened during the strike, what happened before the strike, what happened after the strike, what were the victories in the strike. We won't be able to do it in a session. So I'm just appealing to people who are part of this process to think about what to do. And maybe while we're thinking about the origins and how it started and the people who started mobilizing towards the uprising, we can think about the strike itself and what happened in the strike, what the politics, what propelled, what was discussed in the mass meetings and the task teams and many meetings that were in the library lawns and they were in the occupation. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, guys. I mean, I don't know, I'm just saying because I just feel like we were in a time that we did a lot of organizing in such a very small period of time. But yeah, that's just what I want to. But I just want to speak to what I'm asked to do today. Maybe a little bit of work that we want to do in terms of what people think are the critical, fundamental, influential moments and factors that led to this movement. In terms of what do people, where they were standing, it might be subjective, it might be objective. But how do we get to October 14th? Because I think what has happened in history and how history is taught mainly is that we're always told about the day of the mobilization. So most people just know about 21st March, we burnt our passes to fight against the apartheid regime. No one knows what happened before and who mobilized and how, what are the forces involved. June 16, we know students in Soweto marched through Soweto. We don't know who mobilized. Before that, what happened? What were the forces involved? What did it take for people to take action at that mass level? So we're trying to do that today with this session, the second session, to say, what do people, from where were they standing? What happened? What were the critical, what were the influential moments that led to them being part of the movement and doing what is happening in the movement? These are some of the things I've heard over the 10 years. It's not limited to this, but this is what I've heard people say to me, what they think originated the movement. Some people say, yeah, it was a spontaneous movement. It was sporadic. Some person said, I was writing a test on the day and I prepared for it. So I was coming to write. So I joined because I was, there, and some person made an example about the Arab Spring to say that this person went to a center of the city, burnt himself, and then it started kind of the big uprising that we know as the Arab Spring in the Arab region. So that's the first part. The second part, some people say, no, but this happened because Wits has this social capital. Otherwise, this protest around access, fees, NEFSAS, and access to education in general was already happening in the push colleges or the previously black universities, your UWC, your TUTs, and the likes. So that's how, so it just caught fire at Wits. Otherwise, we had this movement moving around. It just it was in the periphery. Some people say that. Some people say, no, but it was inspired by some radical struggles already happening in higher education. That there was Rose Must Fall, that there was October 6, that there was Transform Wits. There was many other organizations and people doing things that were not necessarily about the access to education, but they are about the curriculum, they are about institutional racism, they are about gender, they are about other things. And people were already toe-to-toe with the university in terms of transforming some of these things that were basically oppressive. So there's a third thing that I have there. And some people say, but the SRC said and took a resolution, this thing. And then we had an uprising the next day. And I say this because some of us who are on campus, I'm narrowly speaking at Wits now, on the day of the 14th, the SRC actually had made a clarion call for a protest. And it wasn't a shutdown, but it was, a lunchtime protest like October 6, go to the tunnel on West Campus. And it had nothing to do with making the university uncomfortable. But someone said, no, but we couldn't say that. We couldn't say we're going to make the university ungovernable. So we made the decoy and said, we're going to go protest lunchtime. And then we knew that we were going to just go shut down the gates. So that's also another thing that was said mainly in the things. And another big reason, the people are saying, no, at the time, Wits was, very politically charged. Activists from different organizations were already jointly taking up struggles. In the struggles against accommodation, the All Race Council organized a big march before the fees must fall. There was October 6 and the MJL Workers Occupation in Habib's office. That was not an organizational thing, but students were already doing things. There was a huge storm at the dining hall to fight against the hunger crisis on campus. There was many things that were being transformed. Wits was already organized around changing the curriculum, the political sciences curriculum. So those were not students of one organization. There was no executive decisions, but there was a group of activists that had a consciousness and were already being part of struggles on campus. And those are the ones that basically led to organizing a shutdown. So there's that as well, but it was cross-organizational. And then the people are saying, but we can't say it's one or two, we can't say it's 3 or 4, but we believe that these contributed, all of them, to this. So I just wanted us to have kind of a 3-minute conversation with your neighbor on what do you think of these reasons. It might not be here, but what you think were crucial, critical, influential, fundamental to the uprising. How, for us to get there, what happened before, what influenced the activists, how do we get to a point where everyone will have one day? Because you remember how quickly the mobilization happened. On the 14th, the shutdown happens during the day. 7 o'clock at night, there's a mass meeting of thousands of students at Solomon House in one day. So it doesn't simply happen like that. It means there were things that happened before that gave the commitment, that gave the zeal, that gave the energy for students to kind of block and have this mass mobilization. So I just wanted us to have this 3 minutes. I'll just give 3 minutes for people next to a person to say, what do you think happened? What are the origins, as I'm tasked to kind of facilitate, of the movement? And then we'll come back and then have a few sessions of what came up from the discussions. And then maybe we were not here to choose. It's not a lottery to say this was the reason. If this didn't happen, this wouldn't have happened. But it's for us to just discuss on where were we at the time, what is our subjective view of the movement, and if you can your neighbor be someone you don't know or you are with, because then you guys are just gonna like say the same thing to each other. So if you have someone in the room, and I'm also inviting people online on the chat, just type to you if you think 2 or 3 appeals, or you think 6, nothing here appeals to what you think was happening before the uprising. And then, yeah, we'll come. So 3 minutes, just, let's go. Martha, Amanda. Comrades, I just want to take maybe 3 hands, because we are running out of time, from the discussions that have been happening, just to get a sense what people discussed and what they thought. Might be interesting because of where people were in campus at the time. So I don't know, can I just get 3 hands for people to just share with us their discussion?
Amandla, comrades, my neighbor here, part 2, was in high school during FISBA's fall. And I was working, I was not studying. So we were talking about the eruption of this mass movement that did not just affect students in terms of reception, it affected all of us. And I was saying to him how embarrassed I was at the time, thinking that when we were striking in the mid-2000s, how I wish we would have championed the movement towards removing the statue first, instead of just walking past it. So the younger generation actually took strides, and it shook us all, even for the working class, even for those that had careers that were promising at that time, even for high school students. It gave them, hope to say that by the time they get to university, they'll have platforms. But as usual, we were met, all of us, with the repression of the state in terms of mobilizing force against the students, because currently what we're seeing at Wits is that the spirit of comradeship and resistance movement declined due to restrictions. So those were the conversations that my high school friend here and I were talking about. Thank you.
I was in high school. I think, yeah, we're not sure if it was in high school or primary, but somewhere there. We think it was mostly point 2 and 3 that led to, I guess, the mass mobilization of the FMF as we now know it, and maybe why. With the first point, right, with institutions that were already consistently mobilizing in the struggle of access to education, I think the moment of RMF comes, and this is like the first time, particularly with FMF, but okay, well, just for the sake of including point 3 into the reason why, or in my thinking of what led to FMF, RMF then becomes a moment where, like, young people are sitting and critically discussing, issues that pertain to their existence. And perhaps during that moment, it takes shape, which is another point, that I had regarding some of the key themes that FMF, I guess, covers, or that was not covers, that sounds so, but that was a big theme of what defined it, yes. Was beyond just access to education, right? Because this had been consistently ongoing struggles, persisting in, as Uzama has called it, bush colleges. So it's... So I think in that moment, it's that RMF and the discourse that circulates around that time, right, allows now for students who are in that position to be like, okay, so if this has been I think this is, okay, to be frank, this is the first moment post-1994 that Black people realized we're still fucked, And so the persistence of the struggle beyond just like the moment of RMF and all of that, and being able to draw to the fact that, yes, now these, more prestigious institutions are feeling affected, or, are mobilizing around the same issues of access and all these, decolonization of institutions and all of those things. And even that subject of decolonization, what is decolonization? How does that look? And I think maybe that's also what sets FMF apart from any other year, and what made it have that spillover effect nationally, which is different from, all the other years. To date, higher institutions of learning, there's always the consistent or the persisting, issues that people face, and therefore the mobilizing that happens there. So I don't know, but I think the timing of RMF and the discourse it puts into the mouths of young people, to be able to, for the first time, have to sit and think of like where have we been put, or how are things very different from 94 leading up to now, and the mobilizing that comes as a result from there. And I think even in understanding FMF, it would be so insincere to the movement to look at it and think of it based off of what was just happening at like Wits, UCT, of course, when it hits those institutions, the media is going to be like in your nose about it. But I think even in terms of capturing in the work of archiving and capturing even maybe the gratuity of the violence that was imposed, or just an idea of the kind of violence and how the state is, so easily ready to, I guess, resist any form of resistance. You are best able to see, and even how at an artistic level, the spillover effect of the political conscientizing that happens during that time. In these bush colleges is where you're best able to like see like the effects of the mental state of being that people are during that time, and so on. So yeah, I'm going on now, but 2 and 3.
Zama, I'm going to just jump in with a couple of online. I'm just going to jump. Yeah. Just about artistics, someone has said here simply Black Thought Symposium. And then that's an anonymous participant. And then Kelly Gillespie has said, this is really helpful. We think it is a combination of all of the things listed. We were saying that in relation to point 2, We would add that it is also the massification of higher education that brings more black and working class students into universities, including historically white ones. There was a tipping point where the project of assimilation of the first generation of black students into white institutions just couldn't work anymore. That's from Leanne and Kelly.
Good day, comrades. So my name is Dorcas. So I think there's one point that we most probably forget. Around that time, Wits was arguing to change the residence laws, right? So most of the time, it used to look at the fact of distance and also, in many, used to look at distance, but then there was an argument that they were trying to make more white people to come through into the space, right? Another part was the fact that PKV at that time, they wanted to turn it into a parking lot, which it has been turned into a parking lot, right? Right. So, what I'm trying to say was that it was easy to mobilize, right? Because now students were not only talking about the fees, they were also worried about now where are they going to stay, right? And not only talking about the student fees, but their accommodations, right? Because as postgrads, we had an issue of the fact that the only place to go was West Campus Village, and West Campus Village was expensive compared to PKV, right? So it was easy to mobilize a lot of students. By the time that students came through, right, the students who later came through, they were not necessarily part of, they were day-to-day students, right, who were not affected by most of the issues that were happening in campus.
Generally, I'm getting a sense that there is not one or two things that people feel were kind of critical to the uprising. And I think just before I continue, as a student on campus, I really feel that it was almost everything that contributed there in terms of us gaining the confidence as activists, gaining the commitment to be able to take on the university. I remember October 6th as me attending the mass meeting after the protest, and there was a cleaner who spoke to us in isiZulu and said, "Why are we protesting in our time of being free? We should disrupt." And at the time as students, we had the PKV strike, we occupied Habib's office for the MJL workers. We were basically doing things that were not really destructive in a sense that makes the university ungovernable. And that gave a consciousness at the time to say, we need to do something that is bigger than that we're doing. And I mean, Rose must fall. One person stood up in a mass meeting and said, students at Rose are protesting. And you guys walk into university through Jan Smart. You walk and you don't see Jan Smart. Your first building is Oppenheimer building. You don't see that. Your consciousness doesn't feel anything. You go sleep at a resident called Benny Penato, who was Rose's best friend, and they did the Rose lands, and they basically took over the discovery of gold in this Witwatersrand. So there was a lot of things that contributed to basically the uprising. And even the call by the SRC was also important in terms of galvanizing students in different places and different corners. And we talk about, academics who were central in organizing the insourcing task team and organizing the workers at the time. So I think this was just for us to think about where were we at the time, and how and what were we doing, and what were our politics. And I just wanted to maybe close our discussion quickly with a few kind of discussion points, and then we basically have a last round to close this discussion around what we think were the origin and what are the critical conditions that led to the uprising. Now, I just wanted to just, because, use kind of a theoretical framework that was developed by Rosa Luxemburg, who was a socialist revolutionary, and who wrote this small, pamphlet analyzing the Russian Revolution, basically looking at the mass strikes that led to the Russian Revolution moving from 1905 to 1917. So what she says when analyzing what is termed as a mass strike or termed as a general strike and how it happens, she said, of course, it's a historical process. It's not artificial. It cannot be called. It's not planned. Some executive sitting in a meeting of an organization can't tomorrow say we have fees must fall, we're going to shut down and make the university ungovernable. It doesn't happen that. It doesn't occur like that. She speaks about how also a mass strike doesn't come from a single form of struggle. Because there are people who think because this struggle was so important, this was the struggle that led to the mass protest. So she said, no, it doesn't happen like that. It must be multi-faceted. It must be a struggle of people doing different things within the campus. And that's what we saw at Wits, that people who joined on the 14th of October, they were not just struggling against NEFSAS and the access to fees, they were struggling against the exclusion in accommodation, they were struggling against the hunger crisis, they were struggling against GBV on campus, they were struggling against workers' rights. So it didn't happen at a time where one struggle was bigger than the other. But there was a group and a broad base of activists who were struggling and they were taking the university toe-to-toe on different issues. So she says, no, you can't say that this came about because there was one form of struggle that happened. So she speaks about as well that it can't be random and it also can't be used as a pocket knife. We can't wake up tomorrow and declare a day and we think that will lead to a mass strike, which Fees Must Fall was. She speaks about how a successful mass protest, a successful mass movement, it has to be a real people's movement. It has to accommodate sections of different people within a space. So it couldn't just be students. So students can, whether they're critical, whether they were the mass base of the movement, they were not just the people who were struggling. The workers were there, and they contributed in how the mass mobilization happened and how we led to October 14th. People will sometimes overlook the contribution of academics in terms of what they did and how they moved and made sure that we get to October 14. And I think at that time, as I said, that we had gotten to a point where a lot of activists on campus had the zeal, had the confidence, and had the commitment to take on the university. And many of the students came into this struggle. Some of them were suspended at the time. I was suspended at the time because we had a huge, big fight during the SLC elections. That was one of the chaotic SLC elections because, it was Mcebo Dlamini, it was Vuyani Pambo, it was Jamie Mighty, and they fought and we got in and, we got suspended. So it was a very politically charged moment at the time, in a sense that activists were able to just, we could do this thing. For when we think about mass struggles, is that we must always, as activists, think about how we should always be part of every form of struggle. Whether it's a petition, whether it's a frustrating meeting, whether it's a march, whether it's a boycott, because those are the things that build up to critical moments and build up into mass movements. So it's not just, when the big marches happen. And we've seen this, people declare mass protests all the time. They declare Section 77 strikes all the time. And it doesn't happen, because there's no these critical moments of how the mass struggle happens. And I mean, this is how Rosa Luxemburg basically theorizes this thing that, it must be the multiplicity of the most various forms of actions, not a schematic plan, And I think even after the movement, there's been always a sense of always wanting to shut down and people saying, but the petition won't do anything, but if we go to the Occupy Habib's office, it's not going to do anything. But the problem is that people don't realize that those were the things that actually built the activist confidence, that built the commitment, that built us where we are. And I just wanted us, for us, when we remember my struggles, to theorize them in such a way. So I just want to share a last quote and then just open for final just comments for people as we close the conversation. This is Gramsci when he's arrested by the fascist government in Italy. He writes that when you're studying a structure, we have to distinguish between organic movements and conjunctural movements. Because organic movements give a rise to a socio-historical criticism. And it speaks about conjunctural movements that are there for some issues at the time, but people will call them issue-based. And maybe this is a question I also throw to people, that do they think that Fees Must Fall was an organic movement that criticizes, the path that was chosen in '94? Or it was just one of those things that every year we have a fee issue, and it doesn't speak to the structure of society and the social formation of South African society? And I think it does. I think it's an organic movement. I think it was an organic movement in a sense that it criticized what the path that was chosen in '94, and that it exposes the better life for all, free education that were basically promised for everyone in the post-'94 setting. And it speaks to a wider sections of mass struggles that have come after '94, because how Rosa speaks about the mass protests towards the revolution, it speaks about how they are interconnected. And I believe that the Fees Must Fall movement was also connected to Marikana, was also connected to the farm workers' strike in the Western Cape, and then Fees Must Fall happened, because these mass protests come from a historical criticism of the contradictions that were left in '94 that I think are not resolved and are not getting around resolving the issue. It's just that the path that was chosen gave us where we are. So this is basically a little bit of a discussion that I had about the summary of where we think the origins of the movement came from. And I think mainly they come from the fact that this is a critique of what was decided, or the path that was taken in '94, that continues to impoverish the majority, that continues to fail even the basic demands of service delivery of water, access to electricity, access to water, electricity, access to health, basically the main demands that were given, even movements before that, like the APF, and that the ANC, I'm sorry to say it like that, has failed to even give in to those small demands. And it's said that you'll be in a taxi and you hear people saying some things were better in apartheid. And that's just an indication that people have seen that we failed even in the most basic demands. And South Africa can afford free education. It was proven through the commission, it was proven through many other things, and other countries that are less richer than us still give free education from primary to university. But we're here because the path that was chosen and the origins of the movement itself and what gave it character and gave it commitment and gave it the politics and the tenacity and gave activists that we see now who are leading in parliament, who are leading in various parts of our activist circles. It's because of basically this main contradiction that gave rise. And of course, that's why every February we expect that students protest, because this contradiction hasn't been resolved, and it looks like we are not aiming to resolve it anytime soon. So thank you very much. This was basically the second session, and I just wanted, maybe some final remarks, especially for people from SWAP who have invited us to kind of come share and have this discussion. Maybe I'll take two hands to close. And on the origins, guys, we've left October 6th, what people thought were the origins, and and whether they think the discussion now we had or some things that are missing within the discussion. Thank you. I see two hands here.
I mean, looking at Gramsci's schemata there, it did raise then the question that, okay, so was it a movement that did change things? And, or was it a moment where, students confronted their... It made me reflect on the fragmented nature of our struggles. I suppose even historically during apartheid, but in particular since '94, where as movements we have not yet in this continent, in the country, mastered this continuity. That there's very, like Fees Must Fall, it was almost an isolated or a particular happening. When we look, obviously, I know that many activists, including myself, who are not at university, but then we gravitated towards what the students were doing. But there was never a sense that this was part of something that was intentional by anybody or by forces. It's just a reflection that we are in this problem. The universities, as you have said, have upgraded or updated their tactics against the student movement, and the students have not been able to respond to that. We were talking about it in the break that where are we with regard to the capacity of students? And I think that we look at the union movement, it's divided itself, and the bosses are on the offensive. There's when you hear of strikes, it's pilot strikes of white unions, elite workers, etc. So one doesn't get a sense, even with the emergence of Abahlali and movements which are actually on the ground, which seem to be bringing a new politics, that we have continuity of struggle and progression of our capacity as a people to take on this system. That's just a reflection, sure.
Yeah, Zama, how can you only ask for 2 closing contributions after such a provocative input? It was very good, and I just want to come back on Ivan here, because both Gramsci and Luxemburg were committed to building the political expression of the working class, mass workers' parties, which are genuinely revolutionary, and we haven't seen those emerge or establish themselves in any meaningful way. I'm from an organization which hopes to see that emerge and is trying to do things in that direction, but I think that is the missing link. The trade unions, which you were involved with, are the schools of the working class, but the university is that mass party, which we don't have. So that's why I think, hopefully, that answers the question you pose for myself. The one thing on Luxemburg, which I think is critical, is she talks about two centers, really, the political and the economic. And Zama, I'm reminded, of course, about Marikana, and that was the build-up of pressure which explodes in many ways with the massacre and the massive amounts of wildcat strikes involving hundreds of thousands of people over the months that follow, and then the longest strike in our labor history in 2014. But this is also happening at the same time as the radicalization, the corruption of the ANC government under Zuma is taking us into. The Nkandla and so on and so forth, the emergence of the EFF, and there's waves of radicalization, people moving. And I think the students, in many ways, they say students are the best barometers of society. And I think that's what the 2014 the 2015, 2016 moment showed us with Fees Must Fall. So in terms of the economic, I mean, highest levels of unemployment, rising cost of living, massive pressure on families to, you know, who can't keep their children at universities anymore. So when we combine the two, and in Luxembourg's words, understand that there's a transmitter between the political and the economic, and these are the radicalizing forces which propel the mass struggles, the mass strike.
So we've got a comment here from Mo Abdullah online saying, I think an important aspect of this is the larger international context that were alive in the minds of students at the time. A couple of years before the Arab Spring was the first social media publicized revolution. Not long after was Black Lives Matter. This was the era where social issues were globalized, unfiltered by mass media, pricking at the consciousness of students. The early to mid 2010s were an era of mass awakening towards white supremacist, repressive, capitalist regimes.
It's mercifully short. I want to know, when are we meeting again? Are there further sessions planned already by SWAP? And if not, is there a process that we can go through to, to try and keep pulling ourselves together around some of these ongoing issues? I mean, our comrade here is still fighting, and we can't leave him fighting alone, and there's all these other issues. So
the plan is that this is the opening session of a series. I will admit that the capacity is limited, so we will be organizing more sessions, taking from some of the comments here today that will help us, hopefully shape some of the program. And so, yeah, there will be more sessions, at least a few more. But we also invite others who want to be more involved to join us and help us shape it and take on sessions. And those in other areas, I know we had people from the Western Cape joining us. If you want to take up doing planning sessions, and so on, we obviously welcome that. So from our side, yes, the collective is planning more sessions of this nature. So we'll obviously put it out as SWAP in terms of publicizing it. So there's that. Yes?
I really wanted to speak after you. It's an appeal. In the introduction, Tasneem spoke about the archival project. And what we want to do is to try and create an archive of the Fees Must Fall movement, the insourcing movement. Unless we actively play a role in developing the archives of our own movements, no one else is going to do it. And so you may ask, what should those archives be? It can be anything. I always tell the story, which I'm going to tell now, because if I don't, then people won't believe me. During the Fees Must Fall movement, I said to the students who I had an opportunity to speak to, you must please keep archives. Because I knew, in fact, from the Arab Spring, and we had people in this very room, when they tried to create histories based on their archives, even though, as Mohammed has said, it was the first sort of social media revolution. In fact, they really struggled to have archives. They took millions of pictures, they have WhatsApp groups, etc., but they struggled to create archives. So I appeal to you, if you have WhatsApps, if you have pictures, if you have posters, please contact us maybe through SWAP, and we will try and organize something. Shahira is already working on some aspects of this, to try and collectively produce our own archives. And finally, I should say, I am still on October 6 WhatsApp group, which still exists, okay? So it's the oldest WhatsApp group that I have, and I wonder how many other people in this meeting are still members of the October 6 WhatsApp group.
So just a few things. The SWAP website, the stuff on the archive, the collage project, the rest of the Remembering Movements project and Remembering FMF project are there, swap.org.za. Otherwise, our Instagram is probably the most active thing. And if you want to contact us directly, it's swap.wits@gmail.com. And then just before we break, just thanks to everyone for coming, but a huge thanks to Noor and Zama for helping us facilitate, and then the swap team, Kim, who fed us all tonight, Simon, Lindy, Shamil for the tech. So just thanks to everyone, for coming, and you'll get another one of these soon. So see you then. Thanks.